Success changes relationships in subtle ways. Most people assume opposition announces itself with open criticism, but that isn't usually how social dynamics work. Resistance often appears in small moments that are easy to dismiss individually but become meaningful when they repeat over time. The important distinction is that no single behavior proves intent. Human behavior is influenced by stress, personality, circumstance, and misunderstanding. What matters is the consistency of the pattern. One pattern to pay attention to is selective enthusiasm. Think about the people who celebrate events that don't threaten the existing balance but become strangely quiet when you accomplish something significant. They have energy for everyday conversations. They respond quickly when you have problems. They engage when the topic is ordinary. But the moment you share meaningful progress, the response becomes noticeably smaller than expected. Maybe it's a short nice, a delayed reply, or an immediate change of subject. None of these actions alone mean anything. People get busy. They forget to answer messages. They have bad days. But when the same person repeatedly minimizes moments that represent your growth while remaining highly engaged in every other context, it's worth asking why. Social psychology offers a simple explanation. Your progress can unintentionally force people to compare their own lives against yours. That comparison isn't always conscious. Sometimes it produces inspiration. Other times it produces discomfort. Most people don't announce that discomfort. Instead, they redirect attention away from the topic creating it. This isn't necessarily malicious, but it can affect how they support you. Another pattern involves the way advice is delivered. Constructive feedback helps you improve. Discouraging feedback leaves you feeling smaller without giving you a practical next step. Imagine sharing a business idea. A supportive critic might point out financial risks and suggest ways to reduce them. A discouraging critic skips the solutions entirely. They focus on everything that could go wrong until the opportunity feels impossible. Their language becomes absolute. Nobody succeeds doing that. People like us don't get those opportunities. You're wasting your time. Absolute language is persuasive because it sounds certain, but certainty is rarely justified when discussing the future. Listen carefully to whether someone's feedback expands your thinking or narrows it. Healthy skepticism asks questions. Unhealthy skepticism closes doors before they're even opened. One invites preparation. The other encourages surrender. The difference isn't just in the words, it's in the outcome. After the conversation, do you have a clearer plan, or do you simply have more fear? A third pattern is inconsistent standards. Notice whether the expectations placed on you are different from those placed on everyone else. When another person makes a mistake, they're given grace. When you make the same mistake, it's treated as evidence that you're not capable. When someone else succeeds, it's talent. When you succeed, it's luck. These shifting standards create a moving target that can never truly be reached. Again, this doesn't automatically reveal hidden motives, but repeated double standards can undermine confidence if you don't recognize them. One of the most useful habits is separating observations from conclusions. They interrupted me 3 times is an observation. They don't want me to succeed is a conclusion. Observations are facts. Conclusions are interpretations. The more you discipline yourself to collect observations before assigning motives, the more accurate your judgment becomes. This protects you from both unnecessary suspicion and misplaced trust. People who navigate complex social environments effectively don't assume the worst, but they also don't ignore consistent patterns. They pay attention to actions over promises, consistency over isolated moments, and long-term behavior over emotional impressions. That mindset doesn't make you cynical. It makes you deliberate. This approach captures the observational, psychology-focused feel while avoiding unsupported claims about hidden intentions. One of the easiest traps to fall into is believing that deception always looks dramatic. In reality, the most influential social behaviors are often subtle. A person doesn't have to openly oppose you to shape your decisions. Sometimes all it takes is a steady stream of doubt, delivered in a calm voice, at exactly the moments when you're about to commit to something meaningful. That doesn't prove bad intentions. It simply highlights why timing matters. When discouragement repeatedly appears just before your biggest opportunities, it's worth paying attention to the pattern rather than dismissing it outright. Consider what happens when you describe a goal with genuine excitement. Most people instinctively mirror the emotional energy of the conversation. Supportive people ask questions. They become curious. They want to understand what you're building and how they can encourage you. Someone who is uncomfortable with your progress may respond differently. They might immediately redirect the discussion toward every possible obstacle without first acknowledging your enthusiasm. Practical concerns have their place. But if every conversation begins and ends with reasons not to try, you should ask yourself whether you're receiving balanced advice or simply absorbing someone else's anxiety. Another useful observation is how people react after you experience a setback. This is where character often becomes clearer than during moments of success. Supportive individuals generally help you recover. They encourage learning, adjustment, and persistence. Others may repeatedly revisit the mistake long after you've already moved forward. They remind you of the failure in conversations where it isn't relevant. They reference it as evidence that you should lower your ambitions. Rather than helping you regain confidence, they keep your attention anchored to a single disappointing event. Psychologically, this matters because repeated reminders shape self-perception. The stories we hear most often, especially from people we trust, can become the stories we tell ourselves. If those stories consistently portray you as someone who isn't capable, eventually your own expectations may begin to shrink. That's why it's important to evaluate not only what people say, but also the long-term effect their words have on your mindset. Watch for another subtle pattern: selective memory. Some people remember every mistake you've ever made, but struggle to recall your accomplishments. When discussing your history, they instinctively highlight failures while overlooking growth. This creates a distorted picture of who you are. Everyone has failures. Everyone has successes. A balanced perspective includes both. An unbalanced one quietly reinforces limitations. Cognitive psychology explains this through confirmation bias. Once someone forms a particular impression, they may unconsciously notice evidence that supports it while overlooking evidence that contradicts it. This doesn't automatically mean they're acting with harmful intent. It does mean you should avoid allowing someone else's selective perception to become your identity. Another behavior worth examining is the way opportunities are discussed. Imagine two people hear about the exact same possibility. One immediately starts asking, "How could this work?" The other immediately asks, "Why will this fail?" Both questions have value. The first explores solutions. The second identifies risks. Problems arise when every conversation becomes dominated by risk with no room for possibility. Balanced thinking requires both caution and creativity. Remove either one, and judgment becomes distorted. You may also notice differences in how people respond to your confidence. Genuine confidence can inspire others, but it can also create discomfort in those who interpret confidence as competition. A confident statement such as, "I'm ready for this challenge," may be reframed as arrogance by someone who already expects you to fail. This is an important reminder that people don't simply react to your behavior. They react to their interpretation of your behavior. Their interpretation is influenced by their own experiences, beliefs, and insecurities. That's why emotionally intelligent people spend less time trying to control how everyone perceives them, and more time ensuring their actions remain consistent with their values. You cannot eliminate every misunderstanding. What you can do is reduce unnecessary inconsistency. Over time, consistency becomes one of the strongest forms of credibility. There's also value in observing how people handle your boundaries. Individuals who respect your growth usually understand that progress requires focus. They may be disappointed when you're unavailable, but they generally accept your priorities. Others repeatedly pressure you to abandon routines that support your goals. They encourage distractions at the exact moments discipline is most important. Again, this doesn't necessarily reveal a deliberate desire to hold you back. Sometimes it reflects their preference for familiarity or shared habits. Regardless of the reason, the outcome is the same if you continually sacrifice meaningful progress to satisfy someone else's expectations. Behavioral experts often emphasize that patterns outweigh isolated incidents. Everyone has moments of impatience, jealousy, or poor communication. Judging someone based on a single interaction is rarely accurate. Looking at repeated behavior across different situations provides a much stronger foundation for understanding the relationship. The same principle applies to yourself. Before assuming someone is undermining you, ask whether you're a consistent pattern over time, or whether you're reacting to one emotionally charged moment. This approach protects you from two common mistakes: trusting too quickly and distrusting too quickly. Both are costly. Healthy skepticism isn't about assuming the worst. It's about gathering enough information before reaching a conclusion. The people who make the best decisions socially tend to separate facts from assumptions, observe before reacting, and let consistent behavior carry more weight than dramatic impressions. One of the strongest indicators of a healthy relationship is emotional consistency. You generally know where you stand. Encouragement doesn't disappear the moment your ambitions become larger than expected. Respect isn't point to. offered only when your goals remain small enough to make everyone else comfortable. Consistency creates trust because it reduces uncertainty. When someone's attitude toward you changes dramatically depending on whether you're succeeding or struggling, it's worth noticing the pattern without rushing to assign motives. There's a concept in behavioral psychology known as status sensitivity. Human beings naturally compare themselves with the people around them. In moderation, this can motivate improvement. Left unchecked, it can influence conversations in subtle ways. A person may not consciously think, "I want this individual to fail." Instead, they may feel uneasy when someone else's progress highlights areas where they feel stuck. That discomfort can shape their reactions without them fully realizing it. Recognizing this possibility allows you to respond thoughtfully instead of personally. Notice how conversations change when your plans become more concrete. It's easy for people to support vague dreams because vague dreams don't require action. But when you begin taking measurable steps, enrolling in classes, launching a project, saving money consistently, or building new habits, the conversation often shifts. Suddenly there are more warnings, more doubts, and more reasons to wait. Caution is valuable, but perpetual hesitation has its own cost. Every meaningful achievement requires acting before certainty exists. Another behavior worth observing is repeated minimization. Imagine spending months developing a skill, only to hear someone dismiss the result with a phrase like, "Anyone could do that," or "You just got lucky." Once again, a single comment proves very little. People sometimes speak carelessly, but when achievements are consistently explained away while failures are emphasized, the pattern can gradually distort your confidence if you allow it. This matters because the human brain is surprisingly responsive to repetition. We don't merely remember information because it's true. We often remember it because we've heard it frequently. If you're repeatedly exposed to messages suggesting your efforts don't matter, those messages can begin to influence your internal dialogue. That's why it's so important to consciously evaluate whether the feedback you receive is evidence-based or simply habitual negativity. Pay attention to who acknowledges the work behind your results. Many people admire success without recognizing the discipline required to create it. The individuals who truly support your growth tend to notice preparation, persistence, and improvement, not just outcomes. They understand that what appears effortless from the outside often reflects hundreds of fine hours of practice. Another revealing pattern involves information. Trustworthy people generally provide information that helps you make better decisions, even if the truth is inconvenient. Less reliable people may selectively share information depending on whether it benefits them. They omit details that would have helped you prepare. They remember to mention opportunities after they've already passed. They become vague when clarity would benefit you most. None of these behaviors automatically indicate malicious intent, but if they occur repeatedly, they reduce your ability to make informed choices. Behavioral analysis often focuses less on isolated words and more on the incentives surrounding those words. Ask yourself a simple question. What outcome does this communication encourage? Does it encourage growth, preparation, learning, and responsibility? Or does it consistently encourage hesitation, dependence, fear, or self-doubt? Looking at outcomes rather than emotional impressions often provides a clearer understanding of the interaction. It's also useful to notice whether someone celebrates your process or only your results. If people appear supportive only after everyone else recognizes your success, their encouragement may be influenced by social proof rather than genuine belief. Authentic support often appears long before public recognition. It shows up during the uncertain stages, when success is still only a possibility and encouragement carries the greatest value. There's another subtle dynamic that deserves attention: shifting expectations. Some individuals continually redefine what counts as success. When you reach one milestone, they immediately move the standard somewhere else. The promotion isn't impressive because someone else earned a bigger one. The completed project isn't enough because another opportunity exists. The achievement is acknowledged for only a moment before it's replaced by a new requirement. Living under constantly changing standards makes satisfaction almost impossible. From a psychological perspective, this can create a cycle where external approval becomes permanently out of reach. That's why resilient people learn to separate healthy feedback from impossible expectations. Improvement is valuable. Perfection is unattainable. The goal is steady progress, not endless validation. Remember that people communicate through patterns of behavior more consistently than through isolated statements. Compliments, criticism, silence, enthusiasm, hesitation, curiosity, and avoidance all gain meaning when viewed over time. A single conversation rarely tells the whole story. Multiple interactions across different situations provide a much stronger picture of the relationship. Perhaps the most important principle is this: avoid becoming consumed by speculation about hidden motives. Whether someone's behavior is driven by insecurity, stress, misunderstanding, or simple personality differences, your response should remain grounded. Focus on what you can observe, establish appropriate boundaries when necessary, seek feedback from people who challenge you constructively, and continue investing your energy where it produces growth. By keeping your attention on evidence rather than assumptions, you become harder to manipulate and better equipped to navigate complex social dynamics with confidence and clarity. There is another pattern that often goes unnoticed because it doesn't involve direct criticism. It involves distraction. Every time you become focused, someone suddenly has an urgent reason why your attention should be somewhere else. The requests may seem reasonable on their own. The conversations appear harmless. The interruptions don't look significant in isolation. Yet when you examine them collectively, they consistently arrive during periods when your concentration matters most. Whether intentional or not, repeated interruptions can have a measurable effect on performance. Research on attention shows that regaining deep focus after a disruption often takes much longer than people expect. This is why highly effective individuals become protective of their time. They understand that attention is a limited resource. Every unnecessary interruption carries an opportunity cost. Rather than assuming people are trying to derail them, they simply recognize that not every request deserves immediate access to their schedule. Setting boundaries isn't an act of hostility. It's a recognition that meaningful work requires uninterrupted thought. Observe how people react when you establish those boundaries. Some may initially be surprised, especially if they're accustomed to immediate responses, but they adapt. Others repeatedly test the limits. They interpret reasonable boundaries as personal rejection rather than practical necessity. That difference reveals something important about the relationship. Healthy relationships generally accommodate growth. Unhealthy ones often resist changes that reduce convenience. Another behavioral pattern involves credit. In collaborative environments, credit serves as a form of social currency. People who genuinely value teamwork are usually willing to acknowledge contributions accurately. They mention the people who helped. They share recognition when it's deserved. By contrast, individuals who consistently minimize others' contributions while emphasizing their own may create unnecessary competition. This doesn't always stem from ill intent. Sometimes it reflects insecurity or a desire for approval. Regardless of the cause, repeated misattribution of effort can erode trust over time. It's equally important to examine your own perceptions. Human beings are naturally vulnerable to attribution errors. We often explain our own mistakes through circumstances while explaining other people's mistakes through character. If someone forgets to return a message, we may assume they don't care. If we forget, we attribute it to being busy. Becoming aware of this tendency helps prevent unnecessary conflict. Before assigning meaning to someone's behavior, consider whether there are plausible alternative explanations. At the same time, don't let the possibility of innocent explanations become an excuse for ignoring consistent patterns. Balanced judgment means holding both ideas simultaneously. You remain open to context while still paying attention to repetition. This mindset avoids paranoia without becoming naive. Another subtle behavior appears in conversations about the future. Notice whether someone consistently redirects your attention toward limitations rather than preparation. Imagine saying, "I'm thinking about applying for this opportunity." A constructive response might be, "What skills will strengthen your application?" A discouraging response might be, "People like us never get selected." The first response encourages action. The second encourages resignation. One assumes improvement is possible. The other assumes outcomes are fixed before the process even begins. The language people use matters because language shapes expectations. Expectations influence behavior, and behavior influences results. If you're repeatedly exposed to messages that portray effort as pointless, motivation naturally declines. This is why many high performers become intentional about the voices they allow into their daily lives. They don't seek constant praise. They seek conversations that are realistic, challenging, and solution-oriented. There is also a difference between accountability and discouragement. Accountability identifies behaviors you can change. It says, "You need more preparation," or "This skill requires practice." Discouragement attacks identity. It suggests you're fundamentally incapable regardless of effort. One message increases responsibility. The other reduces hope. Recognizing this distinction allows you to benefit from honest criticism without absorbing unnecessary negativity. Another observation involves curiosity. Supportive people are often curious about your progress because curiosity reflects investment. They ask thoughtful questions. They remember details from previous conversations. They follow up because they're genuinely interested in your development. By contrast, someone who repeatedly dismisses or ignores topics that matter deeply to you may be signaling a lack of engagement. Again, this doesn't automatically imply harmful intentions. Interests differ. Priorities differ. But when people consistently show little interest in the goals that define an important part of your life, it may influence how much emotional energy you choose to invest in that relationship. Confidence also changes the way people respond to you. As your competence grows, your need for external validation often decreases. Interestingly, this shift can alter social dynamics. Some people appreciate your independence because it reflects maturity. Others may feel uncomfortable because they were accustomed to playing the role of constant advisor or decision-maker. Healthy relationships adapt to these changes. They celebrate increasing independence rather than resisting it. One final principle is worth remembering throughout every interaction. Behavior should be interpreted within context. Stress, fatigue, grief, major life transitions, and personal challenges all influence communication. An unusually distant conversation during a difficult week should not carry the same weight as a tacit pattern repeated over months or years. Wise observers avoid drawing sweeping conclusions from isolated events. They collect information patiently, compare behavior across situations, and allow consistency, not emotion, to guide their understanding. That approach doesn't make your decisions slower. It makes them more accurate. Instead of reacting to every uncomfortable moment, you become skilled at recognizing enduring patterns. You learn to distinguish temporary tension from lasting dynamics, constructive criticism from chronic discouragement, and honest concern from advice that repeatedly leaves you smaller, less confident, and less willing to pursue meaningful goals. Over time, this disciplined way of observing people becomes one of the most valuable skills you main, because it helps you protect your judgment while remaining fair, thoughtful, and grounded in evidence rather than assumption.